Welcome back, everyone. Tonight, I'm bringing you 3 deeply disturbing stories from police officers, men and women who responded to calls that started as routine procedures but quickly became experiences that would haunt them for the rest of their careers. These aren't fictional police procedurals or exaggerated stories from the internet. These are real accounts from real officers who walked into situations that challenged everything they thought they knew about human nature, about safety, and about the darkness that can exist behind closed doors in seemingly normal neighborhoods. Before we dive in, I want to know, do you have respect for the work police officers do? Have you ever wondered what they encounter during those late-night shifts when most of us are safely asleep in our beds? Drop a comment and share your thoughts. Because what you're about to hear will make you realize that sometimes, the most terrifying calls aren't the ones involving obvious danger, they're the ones that seem normal until they are not. These officers walked into homes, basements, and dark situations not knowing what they'd find. And what they discovered changed them forever. Alright, let's begin. And remember, every word of these stories is true. Story 1, The Figure in the Hallway. I've been a K9 handler for almost 9 years now. My partner is a 4-year-old German Shepherd named Rex. He's trained in tracking and narcotics detection, and he's as solid as they come. I've taken Rex into abandoned warehouses where homeless encampments had become drug dens. I've taken him into condemned houses where the floors were so rotted you could see through to the basement. I've taken him into dense woods at night searching for missing persons. And through all of it, every single deployment, he's been steady, focused, professional. Rex doesn't spook easily. That's what makes him an exceptional police dog. I've seen him track armed suspects through dangerous terrain without hesitation. I've watched him enter buildings that made even veteran officers nervous, and he's never once shown fear or refused a command. That's why what happened that night stuck with me so profoundly. Because Rex was terrified. And I'd never seen him like that before in our entire partnership. We got called in around 11:30 p.m. to assist patrol with a house search. Officers had attempted to stop a male suspect a few blocks away for questioning regarding a reported assault. When they approached him, he bolted. They chased him through several backyards before losing sight of him near a specific property on Maple Street. When patrol checked the area, they found a side gate to the yard standing open and the back door of the house unlocked. Neighbors had also reported hearing what sounded like a violent struggle in the backyard maybe 10 minutes before officers arrived, shouting, something heavy hitting the ground or a fence, then silence. Patrol officers swept the first floor but weren't comfortable calling it clear. The layout was confusing, with lots of rooms and closets, and they had a strong feeling the suspect had forced his way inside and was hiding somewhere in the house. That's when they called for Rex and me. We arrived about 20 minutes after the initial pursuit ended. The house was a 2-story colonial in a quiet subdivision, the kind of neighborhood where people know their neighbors, where kids ride bikes in the street, where nothing bad is supposed to happen. There were no signs of forced entry from the front. Everything looked normal from the outside, porch light on, lawn neatly maintained, newspapers stacked on the porch indicating the owners were probably out of town. The officers on scene briefed me quickly. They told me they'd cleared the first floor but couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still inside. The suspect had vanished within yards of this house, and with the open gate and unlocked door, it was the most logical place for him to hide. I put Rex on a short leash and gave him the search command. He pulled forward immediately, nose down, moving from room to room on the first floor with purpose and focus. Living room, clear. Kitchen, clear. Laundry room, clear. Dining room, clear. Rex was working perfectly, checking corners, sniffing under furniture, doing exactly what he'd been trained to do. We moved upstairs. The second floor had a narrow hallway with 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. There was no fresh air circulating up there, no breeze from open windows. Everything was closed up tight, stuffy. The neighbor had mentioned the owners were on vacation, which explained the stale atmosphere. Rex and I went into the first bedroom, clear. Then the second bedroom, also clear. Standard procedure, everything by the book. Then Rex pulled toward the bathroom at the end of the hall. I let him lead, trusting his nose and his instincts completely. The bathroom was small and appeared clean at first glance. Nothing obviously out of place. A few toiletries on the counter, a shower curtain drawn closed, standard fixtures. Rex sniffed around the edge of the vanity, checked the floor near the toilet, investigated the shower. Then he moved back toward the doorway. That's when he froze. His ears went forward, that alert posture that means he's detected something significant. His entire body went rigid, muscles tensed like coiled springs. And then he started growling. Low and continuous, a sound I'd heard him make before when he sensed a genuine threat. But he wasn't growling at anything in the bathroom. He was staring out into the hallway, locked onto something I couldn't see from where I was standing. Then the growls turned to barks. Loud, aggressive barks. Rex was staring down the hallway, fixated on something at the far end, and his reaction was unlike anything I'd seen from him in 9 years of partnership. I stepped backward out of the bathroom with him, my hand instinctively moving to my weapon. "What is it, boy?" I said quietly, following his line of sight down the hallway. That's when I saw it. At the very end of the hallway, near the last bedroom door, there was a figure. A tall, dark, completely motionless figure standing in the shadows. At first, my brain tried to categorize it as one of the officers from downstairs. But it looked wrong. Too tall, too still, too dark. The figure was just standing there, not moving at all, facing in our direction. It definitely didn't look like any of the officers I'd seen at the scene. They were all in uniform with reflective patches. This figure was wearing something dark and formless, and it was completely silent and motionless. Plus, if it was one of our guys, they would have announced themselves immediately. That's basic protocol. You don't stand silently in dark hallways when another officer is conducting a search. I identified myself clearly. "Police. There's a K9 with me. Identify yourself." No response. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, didn't react at all. "Who is that?" I called out louder, my voice sharper now. "Identify yourself immediately." Still nothing. Just that tall, dark shape standing perfectly still at the end of the hallway. And then Rex did something I'd never seen him do in our entire partnership. Something that made my blood run cold. He started pulling backward. Away from the figure. Away from the hallway. He didn't want to go forward. He wanted to get away from whatever he was seeing. Police dogs are trained to be aggressive, to pursue, to confront. They don't retreat. They don't back down. That's the entire point of their training. But Rex was terrified. I tried to move forward down the hallway, to approach the figure, to do my job. But Rex planted his feet and pulled backward with all his strength, actually dragging me back a step. "Rex, heel." I commanded. But he wouldn't obey. He just kept pulling, kept growling, his eyes never leaving that figure at the end of the hall. As I watched, the figure slowly, almost mechanically, turned and walked into the bedroom at the end of the hallway. Not quickly, not like someone running from police. Just a slow, deliberate turn, and then it disappeared through the doorway. I keyed my radio immediately. "I've possibly located the suspect in the end bedroom upstairs. All units, make your way up here now." I could hear footsteps on the stairs, multiple officers responding to my call. I tried again to pull Rex forward down the hallway. He resisted with every ounce of strength in his body. He actually looked up at me with this expression I'd never seen before, like he couldn't understand why I was making him go toward whatever was in that room. Like I was betraying him by forcing him forward. I kept pulling, and he kept resisting, until we finally reached the bedroom doorway. Rex absolutely refused to cross the threshold. He planted his feet in the hallway and would not enter that room no matter how hard I pulled or what commands I gave. I took a deep breath, drew my weapon, and stepped into the room alone with my gun raised and ready. The bedroom was empty. Completely empty. Just a bed against the far wall and a dresser across from it. No one standing in the shadows, no one hiding in the obvious places. The other officers reached the hallway, and we conducted a thorough search together. We checked under the bed, nothing. The closet, empty. The window, closed and locked from the inside. No attic access, no crawl space, no hidden panels in the walls. We even checked the walls themselves, tapping and pushing on them to see if there were any false panels or hidden doors. Nothing. The room was a dead end with no possible escape route. Rex stayed in the hallway the entire time. He absolutely refused to step foot in that bedroom. One of the other officers, veteran cop named Martinez who'd worked with K9s before, tried coaxing him in with treats and gentle words. Rex wouldn't budge. Just stood there in the hallway, occasionally glancing nervously at the doorway like something might come through it at any moment. We searched every inch of that bedroom and found nothing. We rechecked the bathroom, searched the other 2 bedrooms again, looked for any possible trapdoor or hidden passage. There was nowhere for a person to have gone. If someone had been standing at the end of that hallway, and both Rex and I saw them clearly, they should still be in that bedroom. There was literally no other way out. After about 20 minutes of fruitless searching, I told the other officers I needed to get Rex out of the house. His behavior was so unusual, so clearly distressed, that it was actually starting to unnerve the other officers too. Before we left, I noticed Rex kept glancing back down the hallway at that bedroom. Like he was making sure whatever had been there wasn't following us. As soon as we stepped outside into the night air, he relaxed visibly. His body language shifted from terrified to just uneasy. When I put him in his crate in my vehicle, he curled up immediately, but he didn't look at me the way he usually did after a search. There was something different in his eyes. Something like confusion or betrayal. Patrol wrapped up the scene about an hour later. No suspect was ever found, not in the house or anywhere in the surrounding area. The homeowners were contacted on their vacation and confirmed they'd secured the house before leaving. No explanation was ever given for the open gate or unlocked door. Maybe the suspect had used the backyard as a temporary hiding spot before moving on. Maybe a neighbor forgot to close the gate after checking on the house. We'll never know. I've replayed that moment thousands of times in my head over the years since it happened. I've tried to rationalize it, to find some logical explanation for what Rex and I both saw. Part of me wants to believe it was a real person, maybe the suspect we were looking for, someone who knew the house had a hidden escape route that we didn't find despite our thorough search. Maybe there was a crawl space or false wall that we missed. But Rex's reaction? I can't explain that away. His tracked armed suspects without hesitation. His entered buildings that were actively on fire. His confronted dangerous dogs, aggressive suspects, every kind of threat you can imagine. His never been afraid. Never refused to follow a command. Never tried to retreat. Whatever he saw or sensed in that hallway scared him more than anything else has ever encountered. And I trust that dog more than I trust my own instincts. Some people I've told this story to suggest that what we saw was a ghost. That the house was haunted. I don't know if I believe in that kind of thing. I'm a practical person. I've worked in law enforcement long enough to know that most mysteries have logical explanations. But every once in a while, something happens that you just can't explain. Something that doesn't fit into the neat categories of solved or unsolved. Rex has never reacted like that before or since. He's gone on to have a distinguished career, hundreds of successful searches, multiple apprehensions. He's a professional in every sense of the word. But if you ever try to get him to go back to that house, and I know because we drove past it once about 6 months later, he immediately starts whining and trying to move to the back of the vehicle, as far from that house as possible. Just about everyone in my department has at least one unexplainable call in their career. One night where something happened that doesn't quite make sense, that doesn't fit into the training or the procedures or the logic we rely on. This was mine. And I'll never forget the look in Rex's eyes that night, the absolute terror in an animal that I've never seen scared of anything else. Whatever was standing at the end of that hallway, whether it was human or something else entirely, it was wrong enough that a highly trained police dog recognized it as a threat beyond anything he'd been prepared for. And sometimes, I think that's the scariest part. Not knowing what it was. Just knowing that it was there, and that it was wrong in a way that transcended normal fear. Story 2, The Voice Like a Child. When I turned 21, I joined the police force in a small, remote town that I won't name for privacy and professional reasons. The department was desperately short-staffed, rural departments often are, and I was a young father who needed steady income and benefits for my growing family. The timing was absolutely perfect. They needed officers, I needed a job, everyone won. Simple as that. Because I was a rookie, fresh out of the academy with zero real-world experience, they naturally assigned me to the night shift. The shift ran from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., a full 12 hours of patrolling dark streets in a town where nothing much ever happened. The veteran guys at the station would tease me about my hours, saying I always got stuck with the crummiest shifts, the ones nobody wanted. But honestly, I didn't mind at all. I've always been a night owl. Even as a kid, I'd stay up reading or playing video games until 2 o'clock or 3 a.m. if my parents would let me. So working nights actually suited my natural rhythms. Most nights were routine and even a bit boring. I'd bust people for speeding, usually teenagers driving too fast on empty country roads. I'd pull over the occasional drunk driver leaving the one bar in town. I'd respond to noise complaints from neighbors who went to bed at 9 p.m. and couldn't stand hearing music at 10 o'clock. The rest of the time, I'd park somewhere central and just listen to podcasts or audiobooks while monitoring the radio. In a weird way, it was actually kind of relaxing, like getting paid to sit in your car and listen to entertainment while occasionally doing actual police work. After about a year in the department, something happened one night that changed everything. Changed how I viewed my job, how I viewed that town, and how I viewed the capacity for human evil. A severe thunderstorm rolled into town around midnight. One of those summer storms that comes seemingly out of nowhere with torrential rain, lightning that turns night into day for split seconds, and thunder that rattles windows. The storm caused major power outages across half the town. Street lights went dark. Traffic signals stopped working. People's homes went black. With flooding starting to close down major roads and the potential for accident reports, I positioned my cruiser in a central parking lot where I'd have good access to most of the main streets. Around 2 a.m., our dispatcher Claire came over the radio. Her voice had that particular tone that immediately gets your attention, not quite panic, but definitely urgency. She reported that someone who sounded like an adult male had called 911 claiming to have been kidnapped. The caller said they were being held captive inside someone's home somewhere in town. Then, mid-sentence, the call ended abruptly. When dispatch tried to redial the number, no one answered. My cruiser had a built-in computer display that showed all the call details: address, caller information, GPS coordinates. I pulled up the location immediately. Based on the address, I was only about 10 minutes away. I was probably the closest officer available. I radioed in that I'd respond and requested backup. Another newer officer named Chris, who joined the department about 6 months after me, came over the radio and said he could be on location in 5 minutes. Then Claire came back on the radio. She paused for a few seconds. I could hear the static in her breathing, before she said something that made my stomach drop. The caller sounded like they were digitally altering their voice somehow. They sounded like a young girl. A child. Officers should proceed with extreme caution. She used those exact words, like a young girl. All of us at the station were pretty close. We looked out for each other. We felt genuine concern for each other's safety. So when Claire said that, when I heard the worry in her voice, I knew this wasn't going to be a standard call. I radioed back acknowledging her warning and drove toward the address, my mind already running through worst-case scenarios. When I turned into the neighborhood, I immediately noticed that every single street light was out. The entire block had lost power in the storm. That meant we'd have extremely low visibility, which automatically made the situation more dangerous. I followed my GPS to the end of the street where the house was located. Chris's cruiser was already there, idling in front of the property. He'd beaten me by maybe a minute. I pulled up next to him and rolled down my window. Rain was coming down in sheets, so loud we had to raise our voices to hear each other. Chris gestured toward the house and said something about its condition. I looked at the property and immediately understood what he meant. The grass was knee-high, completely overgrown. Wild bushes had grown up in front of several windows, blocking them from view. The roof was visibly damaged, dented in several places, missing shingles, sagging slightly in the middle. The house looked abandoned. Like no one had lived there or maintained it in years. This immediately sent alarm bells ringing in my head. You can tell a lot about someone's mental state by how they treat their living space. When someone lets their property deteriorate this badly, it usually indicates severe depression, mental illness, substance abuse, or worse. "I'll take the lead," I told Chris, even though my heart was already pounding. We both stepped out of our cruisers into the pouring rain. We opened our umbrellas, though they did almost nothing against the horizontal rain, and followed a waterlogged path through the overgrown yard toward the front door. Chris clicked on his flashlight as we approached. Whenever you have a second officer present during an investigation, their primary job is to protect the lead officer. They watch the suspect's body language, monitor for threats, keep their weapon ready in case things go south. Chris was the perfect backup because he was observant and calm under pressure. That allowed me to focus entirely on the suspect's story and determining whether I was hearing the truth or being lied to. When we reached the door, I knocked loudly, 3 sharp raps that echoed despite the rain. Then we stood there in the downpour, listening for movement inside. After a few seconds, we heard footsteps. Slow, shuffling footsteps approaching the door from inside. Then they stopped right on the other side. Whoever was there was just standing on the other side of the door, completely still. Listening to us just like we were listening to them. A feeling came over me, that uncomfortable sensation of being watched. I let my gaze drift slowly to the peephole in the door. As soon as I focused on it, I saw a distorted shape pull back quickly. Like whoever had been looking through the peephole had just jerked their head away when they realized I was looking back. "Police department," I called out firmly. "Would like to ask you some questions. Please open the door." Silence. Complete stillness from inside the house. "Sir, we received a 911 call from this address. We need to speak with you. Please open the door." The person on the other side seemed to be thinking, deciding what to do. Then, slowly, I heard the lock turn. The door creaked open, but only about a foot. Just wide enough for someone to peer out. A man looked out at us through the gap. He appeared to be in his early 30s, overweight, balding, wearing thick-rimmed glasses that were slightly crooked on his face. I took one look into his eyes and knew immediately that he was hiding something. There was guilt there. Fear. Deception. "We received a 911 call from this address," I said clearly. "Someone reported being kidnapped. Do you know anything about that?" The man's expression shifted to confusion, but it felt performed, not genuine. "Oh, that must have been a pocket dial. Sorry about that. My phone's been acting weird." "If it was a pocket dial," I said slowly, "how do you explain the voice on the call?" The caller said they were being held captive. For just a split second, the man's eyes shifted away from mine. Then he said, "I don't know anything about a voice. It must have been my TV or something. I was watching a movie." "Is there anyone else in the house?" I asked. "No," he said quickly. Too quickly. "I live alone. For safety reasons, we need to come inside and have a look around," I told him. His jaw tightened. "Not without a warrant." I expected that response. But these days, a warrant can be obtained remarkably quickly, especially for emergency situations. I went back to my cruiser, called dispatch, and requested communication with the on-call magistrate, the judge who handles after-hours warrant requests. Within 5 minutes, Claire came back over the radio and told me the judge had approved a telephonic warrant. It had been emailed to the department and forwarded to my in-car computer. I pulled up the warrant, printed a copy from my mobile printer, and walked back to the door through the rain. "We have a warrant," I said, showing him the document. "You need to let us inside. Now." The man's hands were visibly shaking as he reluctantly pulled the door open wider. The smell hit me immediately. A putrid, overwhelming stench of garbage, body odor, and something else I couldn't quite identify. Something organic and deeply wrong. I clicked on my flashlight, the power was out here too, and stepped inside cautiously. The layout was simple. A hallway straight ahead, and a room immediately to my right. I shined my light into the right-hand room and saw what appeared to be a living room. It was absolutely disgusting. Piles of clothes covered every surface. Stacks of dirty dishes, some with food still on them, molding and covered in flies, were scattered across the floor. Cockroaches were literally crawling over everything, unbothered by our presence. A filthy couch sat at an angle against one wall, and the carpet was stained with God knows what. This was clearly where the man spent most of his time. This was his living space. I'd seen living conditions like this before in drug cases and hoarding situations. When people get that deep into addiction or mental illness, they stop caring about basic hygiene and sanitation. When I turned back to look at the man, he shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. I made a mental note to search for drug paraphernalia once I'd confirmed the house was safe and no one was in immediate danger. I started toward the hallway, and my foot struck something on the floor. I looked down and shined my light on it. It was a pink Barbie dollhouse. One of those large, elaborate ones with multiple rooms and tiny plastic furniture. I recognized it immediately because I'd bought the exact same one for my daughter last Christmas. Same design, same color scheme, same little furniture pieces. "Do you have kids?" I asked, turning to look at the man. "No," he said quickly. "But sometimes my nieces come over to visit, so I keep some toys around for them." Chris and I exchanged a look. We both knew that was complete bullshit. No mother in her right mind would allow children into this environment. The place was a health hazard, practically condemned. "This is your last chance," I said, my voice harder now. "Is there anyone else in this house? Anyone at all?" "No," he insisted, his voice shaking. "There's no one here but me. I swear." I started down the hallway without another word. Behind me, I heard the man start to follow, saying nervously, "There's nothing down there. You don't need to." Chris grabbed him by the arm and pulled him back. "Stay here," Chris ordered firmly. The hallway had 2 open doors on either side and a closed door at the far end, probably leading to a basement. I looked into the first room on the right, scanning slowly with my flashlight. More children's toys scattered across the floor. Stuffed animals, dolls, building blocks. And there were diapers, packages of disposable diapers stacked in the corner. But what really disturbed me was something in the corner of the room. In the dim light from my flashlight, I saw a large dark shape hunched over in a rocking chair. My hand went to my weapon immediately, my heart racing. Then I realized a second later that it was a doll. An enormous, life-size doll, sagging forward in the chair with its head down. The shock of that image, thinking for just a moment that it was a real person, made me lean against the door frame to catch my breath. But as I looked more closely, I saw that the doll was dressed in women's clothing. a blouse, jeans, even jewelry around its neck. On the bed next to the rocking chair, more women's clothes were folded into neat, organized piles. Each pile was separated by color, blues together, reds together, whites together. Meanwhile, the rest of the house was absolutely filthy. But this room, with its organized clothes and carefully positioned doll, showed a level of care and attention that was deeply unsettling. All clear, I called back to Chris, though my voice didn't sound quite right even to my own ears. I moved to the second bedroom. This one was mostly empty, just a bare mattress on the floor and more trash. Then I reached the final door at the end of the hallway. From behind me, the man suddenly called out, "Actually, why don't we check upstairs instead? There's really nothing in the basement worth looking at." I heard Chris tell him firmly to stay still and stop talking. The more I moved toward this basement door, the more agitated the man became. He was practically begging us to stop, to leave, to check somewhere else instead. Which told me exactly where I needed to go. I reached for the door handle, twisted it, and pulled the door open. It squealed loudly on rusted hinges that clearly hadn't been oiled in years. A set of steep wooden stairs descended into pitch blackness. I shined my light down and could only see the landing at the bottom. The rest of the basement was too dark to make out. From somewhere deep in that darkness, I heard something. A rattling sound. Metal scraping against something. I heard movement. I called back to Chris. "Someone's down there." Behind me, the man started apologizing over and over, his voice rising in pitch. I'm sorry, please don't go down there, please." His reaction confirmed what I already knew. Someone was definitely down there. Even though it was the absolute last thing I wanted to do, descending into a dark basement in a disturbing house with a clearly unstable homeowner, I had no choice. This was my job. Someone had called 911 for help, and that person was probably in that basement. I started down the stairs carefully, each step creaking under my weight. The rattling sound grew louder as I descended. Behind me, I could hear the man begging us to stop, to leave his house, to please just go away. I reached the bottom of the stairs and swept my flashlight across the space. Stacks of boxes, old furniture, piles of junk everywhere. But no person visible. Story 3, The Empty House with Blood. I've been a patrol officer for a little over 8 years now, and I've worked nights for most of that time. When you work the midnight shift, you see things. Domestic disputes that turn violent, drunk drivers, break-ins, overdoses, I've lost count of how many of each. After a while, most calls start to blend together in your memory. You show up, you separate people if needed, you take a report, maybe make an arrest, and then you move on to the next call. Routine becomes routine. But there are a handful of calls, maybe 5 or 6 in 8 years, that never fade. That stick with you for reasons you can't quite articulate. That change something fundamental in how you see your job. This is one of them. It happened in late October a few years back, around 2:40 in the morning. I was probably halfway through my shift, cruising through a residential area, half listening to a true crime podcast while monitoring the radio. Then dispatch toned me out for a 911 hang-up call. The caller had reported hearing a woman screaming from inside the house next door, then the call disconnected before they could provide more details. The address was on a quiet residential street in a decent middle-class neighborhood. Single-family homes, well-maintained lawns, cars and driveways. Not an area that generated a lot of police activity. The caller told dispatch that the screaming had stopped by the time they dialed 911, but they were certain they'd heard someone yelling for help. A woman's voice, desperate and terrified. I was only about 5 minutes away, so I advised dispatch I'd respond. When I pulled up to the street, it was completely silent. Most of the houses had their lights off. It was nearly 3 a.m. at this point. A light rain had just started, making the pavement glisten under the streetlights. The house in question was a 2-story colonial with a small front porch. There were no lights on inside that I could see from my position at the curb. I parked a few houses down and approached on foot, staying alert, my hand near my weapon out of habit. As I got closer to the house, I noticed something that immediately raised my concern. The front door was slightly open. Not wide open, but definitely not closed. Maybe 6 inches of gap between the door and the frame. That confirmed at least some validity to the 911 call. Someone had either left in a hurry or entered without closing the door properly. I radioed dispatch and advised that I was on scene and had found an open door. I requested backup, but at that time of night, the nearest available unit was at least 10 minutes out. I stepped onto the porch carefully and listened. The only sound was the light rain starting to fall harder, pattering on the roof and the lawn. I knocked on the door frame firmly. Police department. Anyone home? No response. I knocked again, louder this time. Police. If anyone is in the house, make yourself known. Still nothing. At that point, with a report of screams and an unsecured door, I had what we call exigent circumstances, legal justification to enter without a warrant because someone might be in immediate danger. I pushed the door open slowly with my foot and stepped inside, my flashlight in one hand and my other hand on my weapon. The interior looked normal at first glance. No signs of forced entry, no overturned furniture, no obvious evidence of a struggle. The living room was directly ahead. Everything appeared neat and orderly, couch properly positioned, TV on its stand, decorative pillows arranged carefully. I searched the living room first, checking behind furniture and in corners where someone could hide. Nothing. Then I moved toward the kitchen. My flashlight beam swept across clean countertops and a sink full of dishes, not unusual for a household. There was a glass on the kitchen table with what looked like water still in it, condensation on the outside. Someone had been sitting there recently. I called out again, louder this time, police department. If anyone is in this house, you need to make yourself known immediately. My voice sounded too loud in the silent house, echoing slightly off the walls. I waited for a response. For someone to call out from upstairs, to identify themselves, to explain the open door and the reported screams. But there was nothing. Just oppressive silence. I moved down the hallway toward the back of the house, checking rooms as I went. Small bathroom on the right, clear. Guest bedroom on the left, clear. At the end of the hallway was a staircase leading to the second floor. As I placed my foot on the first stair, I heard something from above. A faint sound. Like a quick shuffle, or someone shifting their weight, or a foot dragging across carpet. I stopped immediately and listened intently. Nothing. But my instincts were screaming that someone was up there. I drew my weapon and began climbing the stairs slowly, one at a time, keeping my flashlight aimed ahead of me, my weapon following the light. The upstairs hallway had 3 doors. 2 were closed, one was slightly open at the far end. As I reached the top of the stairs, I heard the sound again. Soft movement coming from the direction of the open door. I announced myself a 3rd time, police. Show me your hands right now. No response. I approached the open doorway carefully and pushed it wider with my foot, staying to the side in case someone inside was armed. It was a master bedroom. Larger than the one downstairs. The bed was unmade, sheets partially hanging off onto the floor. A lamp on the nightstand had been knocked over, lying on its side. That was the first thing that looked definitively wrong, evidence of some kind of struggle or disturbance. I swept the room with my light. Checked the closet, empty. Under the bed, nothing. The window was closed and locked from the inside. But something felt off. The room felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. I still had 2 more rooms to clear. The second bedroom appeared to be a child's room based on the toys on the floor and the posters on the walls. Also empty. The last door was the bathroom. As I reached for the handle, I noticed something on the carpet just outside the door. A dark spot that I'd initially thought was just a shadow from my flashlight. I crouched down to examine it more closely and realized it was wet. I touched it with my gloved hand and brought my fingers up into the light. Blood. Fresh blood that had soaked into the carpet fibers. My heart rate spiked immediately. I keyed my radio, dispatch, I have blood at the scene. Expedite that back up immediately. I pushed the bathroom door open and flipped on the light switch with my elbow. The shower curtain was closed. There were streaks of blood on the white tile floor leading toward the bathtub. I moved closer, weapon raised, and yanked the shower curtain back in one quick motion. The tub was empty. But there was more blood near the drain, quite a lot of it, actually. Fresh blood that hadn't dried yet, like someone had been standing there bleeding just minutes before I arrived. I checked everywhere in the bathroom, behind the door, in the linen closet, under the sink. Nothing and no one. Backup was still several minutes out. I was alone in this house with fresh blood and no victim, no suspect, no explanation. I did another sweep of the upstairs, moving more slowly this time, checking every shadow. That's when I heard a sound from below me. From the first floor. A floorboard creaking under weight. I moved back to the top of the stairs and aimed my flashlight down into the darkness below. The living room was still dark. I couldn't see movement, but I could feel it. That instinctive sensation of being watched. I descended slowly, trying to control my breathing, my weapon drawn. When I reached the bottom, I cleared the living room again. Then the kitchen. That's when I noticed something I'd somehow missed on my first pass. a door near the refrigerator that I'd assumed was a pantry. It was now standing slightly open. I was almost certain it had been closed when I'd first checked the kitchen. I approached it cautiously and pulled it open wider. It wasn't a pantry. It was a narrow staircase leading down to a basement. There was a light switch at the top. I flipped it, but nothing happened. Either the bulb was burned out or the power had been cut to the basement. The stairs descended into complete darkness that my flashlight couldn't fully penetrate. I radioed my position. Dispatch, I'm entering the basement. Still no sign of the victim or any suspects. I started down the stairs carefully. The basement was unfinished. Concrete floor, exposed ceiling beams, boxes and junk stacked along the walls. As I stepped off the last stair onto the concrete, I saw something in the middle of the room that made my blood run cold. A metal folding chair. Just sitting there in the open. And beneath it, a large pool of blood. Much larger than what I'd seen upstairs. Fresh and still glistening in my flashlight beam. The chair had zip ties attached to the armrests. They'd been cut, the loose ends hanging down, the plastic still showing the marks where they'd been sliced through with something sharp. Someone had been restrained in that chair. Recently. Within the last hour, probably. I scanned the rest of the basement with my light, my heart hammering. That's when I saw movement in the far corner. A figure bolting behind a stack of boxes. Stop. Police. I shouted, moving toward them. But they were fast. They ran toward the back wall of the basement where there was a small window near the ceiling, one of those narrow basement windows that lets in a little natural light during the day. I heard glass shattering. By the time I reached that corner, the window was broken and whoever had been down here had forced themselves through the narrow opening. The window led to a side yard between houses. I tried to follow, climbing up and squeezing through the window, cutting my hand on broken glass in the process. Outside, the rain was coming down harder now. I could see a dark figure sprinting toward the alley at the end of the block. I chased after them for maybe 30 seconds, but I lost sight of them when they turned the corner. They could have gone in any direction after that. Backup arrived minutes later, 3 units responding to my calls for assistance. We set up a perimeter around the neighborhood. K9 units responded. Detectives came out to process the scene. But we never found the person who'd run. The house, we eventually learned, belonged to a man in his early 40s who lived alone. He wasn't there when we searched. We found his wallet upstairs and his phone on the kitchen counter. His car was in the garage. There were clear signs he'd been restrained in that basement chair for some period of time. The blood we collected matched his blood type. There was a lot of it, enough to indicate serious injury, but not enough to definitively confirm he'd died. He was never found. To this day, more than 3 years later, he's still officially listed as a missing person. The neighbor who called 911, an elderly woman who lived next door, swore she heard a woman screaming. But we never identified any female connected to that address. No women's clothing, no evidence anyone else lived there, nothing. I've thought about that night constantly over the years since. Tried to piece together what happened, tried to understand the timeline. Did I interrupt something in progress? Or did I arrive just after it was already over? If that person in the basement hadn't made noise, if they hadn't knocked over those boxes while hiding, I might have cleared the basement, found nothing obvious, and left thinking it was a false alarm. The missing man's case is still technically open. Detectives review it periodically, hoping for new leads. But there's never anything. Every once in a while, I drive down that street on patrol. A new family lives in that house now. I see kids' bikes in the driveway sometimes, toys on the lawn. It looks like a normal, happy home. But I know what happened there. I know about the blood in the bathroom and the basement. I know about the restraints on that chair. I know about the person who escaped through that window. And I know that in the most normal-looking neighborhoods, in houses that seem perfectly safe and ordinary, the worst things imaginable can happen behind closed doors. Sometimes I wonder, did the man who lived there survive? Is he being held somewhere else? Or did his body end up somewhere we'll never find it? And sometimes, though I try not to think about this too much, I wonder if the person I chased that night was the victim trying to escape, or the perpetrator fleeing the scene. I'll probably never know. And that's what haunts me most. 3 officers. 3 calls that started as routine procedures. 3 nights that revealed the darkness that can hide in plain sight in any community, any neighborhood, any home. I want to thank the officers who shared these experiences. It takes courage to admit when something happens on the job that you can't fully explain or that haunts you years later. If you found these stories compelling, please like and subscribe. And if you're a police officer or first responder with your own unexplainable or disturbing story, share it in the comments. These experiences deserve to be heard and documented. Stay safe out there. Lock your doors. Pay attention to your neighbors. And remember, the people sworn to protect us often see things that most of us will never have to witness. Things that change them forever. Until next time.